Hello everyone, so today it's finally the video I teased a bit. It's the strategy guide or the advanced progression video. The goal of this video is to help you push the further you can with your given power. All the increase in power come from the progression guide I already did. So equipments, fate, God's inventory and everything, I already covered it there. And on this video, I'm just gonna give some tips to optimize your team to get through the content, and some little tips that can work for specific content that can help you maybe pass certain floors and to push some levels further than the one you're blocked on initially. So I'm gonna first cover TOT, Tour of Trial. Then I'm gonna cover story a bit. Then I'm gonna talk about Ricepot, and I will end with PvP about Ranker Wars. So let's go. Okay, so I first want to cover TOT because it's the content where you're gonna need the most special composition and special units to counter certain floors, and so it's the content that's gonna push you the best on thinking about the characters you're playing and why you are playing them and everything. And also one thing is that they've added a very cool feature that allow you to check what other players used to pass a certain stage, and that's really interesting to help people that maybe struggle understanding a bit how the game works and everything, and to give some ideas on some certain compositions that may work. So the first thing I'm gonna cover is the two types of composition that we can find in the game, because for me you can really define two different types, and I'm gonna try to go into details about why we use them and what are the core mechanics in each type. So the first type is a control team. It's a team where you're gonna basically use a lot of CC, of control, of skills that allow you to block the enemy's attack or enemy skills and everything, to buy you some time and to kill the enemies during that time. So for example, if I check on this clear info, I'm gonna see a lot of control units. So like if you see this, this tree right there, you have units like Sachi Faker and Onsong Yu that are very big control units, and they are played with a front line, a tank, that is Varagav. So the role of a unit, you can either find it on the wiki or by just simply reading skills. So on the wiki you will find things like controller, you will find things like healer, tank and everything. And you can also simply read the skills and you can find some details that gonna allow you to understand what characters does what. But basically, if you see very control heavy composition like this one that doesn't include healers, that means that they are mostly just relying on the controls to survive, and they expect to kill the enemies before dying themselves. That's why they don't bring any healers, for example. They only use a tank to buy some more time, because the tank is gonna allow your team to survive a lot more, because it's gonna soak up a lot of area of effect skills, especially because some tanks dashes forward. So that means that at the beginning of the fight, they're gonna dash on the enemy and they're gonna separate from your core team. That's for example the case with Varagav, but it's also the case with Oriong, and it's also the case with Jinsung A and Yurek Mazino on Legendary. And so those specific characters are gonna allow you to gain enough time, so all your carries are gonna be able to deal enough damage. So in those types of composition, Varagav is gonna be the tank, so you can use other tanks like Oriong or Jinsung if you have enough, or Yurek also. If you have enough Transcendence. For a tank, you're gonna need something around above T3 for the passive, and you're gonna need every Transcendence you got, because it gives more defensive stats, so it's important. And also you need good fate, good affinity with the characters, because in affinity you have a lot of defensive stats. Then you're gonna play things like Vial, that controls a lot the enemies. It's gonna control one character for 5 seconds, it's very good. And then they're gonna play one core DPS a lot of the times. Sometimes the DPS can also control, but for white it's mostly for the DPS. And then they're gonna play a lot of control. So a lot of the time it's gonna be Sachi Faker, because we got an event and the unit is very good. But he also helps with the DPS, so it's good. And you're gonna find Ansung Yu for the control, but also another reason that I'm gonna detail a bit later on. So that's a typical control composition that doesn't include healers, because the goal is not to really sustain and survive a lot. It's to survive just enough to kill the enemies in time, and this way you can progress to the tower. Another strategy is using healers, and this is quite different, because when using healers you're gonna have one strong tank once again, but then you're gonna want him to survive, and so you're gonna bring a strong healer with it. So that's when we can find things like Evan, or things like Albelda now that she's released. And so this way you will be able to maybe survive a lot more, and so it's gonna allow you to maybe beat some tankier targets, because on this level you can see things like Loft, it is a tank, and so you can imagine that you need to survive more, and so just trying to rush for damage is maybe not the solution. And so since the enemies are losing a bit of damage to maybe more survivability with a tank right now, a good strategy can be to bring a healer and to have a team more focused on that, to kill the enemies, and you don't need to rush as much as with a control team. So same as for the last team, you can find every healer on the wiki, and they're gonna get the tag healer. And the most obvious ones are Albelda that she released, Evan obviously, a very strong healer, and even things like Kuneye that can be good, especially at the beginning. And you can have complementary healers like Verdi and White Mirror Kun, because with healers on some stages, especially earlier in the tower, but maybe if you don't have some crazy units like all these guys, you can also stack several healers together. So teams with like 2 or 3 healers can be really good on some stages, especially stages where enemies doesn't have a ton of damage, and you can maybe out-sustain them. And so you can play things like Kuneye with Verdi and Evan, or with White Evelyn Mirror Kun and Verdi and everything, especially because some legendary healers have a passive that increases all the teammates' healing, and so they are very strong together. And so that's for me the big 2 types we can find. It's teams based around control and team based around healing. We're gonna find control in healing teams a lot of the times, especially since some damage dealer, as I say, do some control. But we're also gonna find some control team that doesn't bring any healers, because, as I said, they're gonna burst the enemy. So that's the 2 big strategies that you're gonna find a lot. Then, to help you a bit more understand why certain strategies work, I'm gonna talk you about some things. So I've already talked about the fact that dashing tanks are gonna take a lot of the focus, and also take a lot of AoEs maybe, and so that you're gonna help your team doing that. But there are other characters that can really help you survive because of how the game works, basically. So another one that is very good is gonna be Han Sung-yu, because these characters has a stun on his skill 2, and so it allows him to stun instantly the enemies. And so if you put him in front line or on specific positions, sometimes you won't ever put him in the front line, but it's gonna allow you to survive the first few skills, because the stun is gonna cancel them. And so is gonna be used a ton in TOT, because a lot of characters, like for example Han Sung-yu himself, things like Waryun also, because she's gonna dash on you and you can cancel this, or you have even things like Anak that has a big AoE and everything, are gonna deal a ton of damage very early on into the fight. And so bringing a stun early on is gonna allow you to survive, because it's gonna make the enemies lose a ton of damage, because they're gonna get stunned and it's gonna cancel out with their attacks. You also have some epic characters that can do that. You have one. Wang Nan can stun on the skill 2, and he can do a similar thing. It's worse because it takes more time for Wang Nan to launch it, so it's not gonna work every single time. But for some people that doesn't have Han Sung-yu, it can work for them as well. But you also have some other strategies that can work, because you don't need to control all the time every unit, and so sometimes you can use also characters like Verdi that only controls the furthest enemy, to maybe survive some bursts this way. You have also characters like Bonbon Adorsi that does kind of the same, that controls the furthest enemy. Verdi is a bit better for this, because she's gonna buff also healing and she's not gonna die instantly like Andorsi. But you have characters this way that gonna control the enemies, and that can allow you to survive specific stages. So when you see them in the clear info, it's probably for a reason. It means that they are very good for this reason, and so that's why they are using them. If you see a lot the same composition, it doesn't mean that you especially need exactly those characters to win it. It just means that those characters works, and a lot of the times people copy on each other and everything. So they're not necessarily are gonna try something else and everything. But I can tell you firsthand that you can pass a lot of things without using the composition everyone is using. So a lot of the times you have very strong units that are obviously helps a lot. Like Han Sung-yu obviously helps a lot, and so having him is gonna help. But you can always find certain strategies. Sometimes you will need some more stats, but it's important to know every little strategy that can maybe win you some rounds, because if it can allow you to push further without using different strategies and everything, it's very good. Like sometimes you can see people using BAM, and sometimes you can see people using Vial, and so that is very important as well, because Vial got some really good control. He got a very nice passive skill, but on some run BAM is very good on against some specific unit, against melee units especially. So the ability to check the clear info and to maybe give you some idea this way to how go through the floors and everything is really important. And you should try to understand a bit more about why they are using certain characters, and that's what this video is for. But I can't detail for every characters and everything. One thing I will also talk about is on some niche characters that you can use sometime. So sometimes you're gonna see people running a lot of Anak and Yuri. So that's specifically against the Yeons, because there is an interaction against Yeon that works with Anak and Yuri, and that is based on Anak targeting the enemy with the highest attack, I believe. I don't know all the things behind this interaction, because it feels a bit weird for me. But it basically allows you to control the Yeon and to gain a lot of time this way. And so on a lot of Yeon on the TOT, you're gonna find Anak and Yuri together, along with Vial, and this is gonna enable a strategy to CC Yeon a lot of time, and since she's dealing so much damage, it's very important. And so that's one specific strategy. It needs 2 legendary characters, so it's a bit hard, but it can work with T0 characters. So that's something to keep in mind. And so when you see a lot of Anak and Yuri, that can be why. Verdi is also an interesting character. Like, as you can see, sometimes people are using Verdi a lot. So that's for to CC a specific characters as well. This can work a ton against specific units. And sometimes you can also see people using Andorsi Bong Bong, as I said, because she's kinda doing a similar thing, even though I think that Verdi is doing it best. So Verdi is to control the last unit a lot of the times. Also, one thing that I forgot to mention is that in the clear info tab, you can see the edit team button, and pressing it is gonna copy the exact team on your team. So you see this way, if you press save, it's gonna replace your team with the characters. You need every character, obviously, but it's gonna work this way, and it's gonna also copy the placement. So you don't need to worry about that. And so that's why the clear info is very, very strong. It can bypass a lot of the strategies a lot of the time. So really use this at your advantage. So like this, we've covered the team type that you will find, and also some specific units you can find. As always, you can check the clear info to check what people bring and everything. One thing to think about is about the refining, because I did some videos about legendary weapons and legendary equipments, and also you can find some info on the website about this. But basically, on legendary weapons, you got specific refining that are the substats there that can be very important. So you have this one that is the most crucial one, that's gonna fill up the Ace Gauge from the beginning. And so this one is very important because it's gonna accelerate a ton the usage of X skill, and that can change units quite a lot. And so you can't see that on the clear info tab. And so some characters can be really, really strong because of this thing. And so keep in mind that maybe you don't have it. And maybe you can have some that others don't have. So maybe if you get like the Freedom Dreamer or the Tower Climber one, you can use specific units that maybe other people don't use. Like you can get the Great Family one and use on Evan. And this way you're gonna get his X skill very fast, and it's gonna make your team really tanky, and that can be a strategy. And so you have to really keep that in mind. Also, a lot of the people using Urea needs to have her T6 and with this substats. So all those requirements are not really mentioned in the team info, but you have to keep in mind that maybe you doesn't have the same equipments as the guy that you are trying to copy. And so even though you have a similar power score and maybe the exact same unit, it's not gonna work every time, especially when you go up at certain levels where things are gonna start to become harder and harder. The people that are gonna push the most are gonna a lot of the times have very strong equipments with a lot of the time strong refine and everything. And so you have to take that into account, because sometimes it won't be enough with just your units alone. So you have to think about this. And also you have to imagine that maybe some units that nobody uses can be used if you got specific characteristics. For me, for example, I use Daniel a lot. I can't show you because I've cleared too long ago, so there is not my score anymore. But I use Daniel a lot because I really like the character and I really wanted to play him. But since I got the Freedom Dreamer weapon with a good refine, I could use him a lot, and he was very strong. And so on a lot of stages, I was the only one using a specific team, and everyone else was using the same one. And so you can completely try to bring different things based on your progression. You just have to understand a bit how it works and test the right thing out. Also, really, you also need to keep in mind to test your own strategies and to change some characters around sometimes, because sometimes it's gonna unlock you and sometimes it's gonna work for you depending on how much you invested on some characters and whatnot. So keep that in mind, and I hope you will progress a lot in TOT like this. One thing I really want to talk about in this video, even though it's a bit more advanced for the subject, is the way control works, because I talked about control a lot with the last part, but there is something very important about control, and it's that every RTC, things like stuns, binds, blinds, silence, and everything, they have some issue is that other controls can interact with each others, and specifically knockback. Knockback is a specific control that is gonna push the enemy back a certain distance depending on the skills that is used for this. Every characters can have different amount of knockback. But the knockback is gonna clear any control on the target. And so this is very, very important to keep in mind when you are trying to really min-max your composition, when you are trying to really hard control the enemies for a long duration and everything. You have to be very aware with knockbacks and with short controls, because they can do the opposite thing that you are trying to do. Because basically, when you have big controls and you cancel it with small ones, it's very bad for you, and you have to be very much aware with this. So you have things like the Orion skill specifically that inflicts a knockback and that sometimes can be a mess, specifically because Orion skill also push the enemy so far back that sometimes your carries are gonna reposition, and they're gonna advance so much that they're gonna take up an AoE maybe and die this way. And so sometimes kicking the enemy back is not gonna help you, and so you have to try removing it on some stages, I will suggest. Also, you have to be aware of certain knockbacks that can cancel certain controls, especially very long ones, because sometimes it can be the thing that makes you fail certain stages. So I know it's not super detailed and everything when I'm just talking about it, because it's somewhat an advanced thing, and you can pretty much ignore it every time you play the game, and it's not gonna matter that much. But if you really try to optimize and really try optimizing control teams especially, you're gonna struggle a lot with this mechanic. And so I'm talking about it right now because I think it's very important. But either way, even if you didn't understand everything I've said, it's not a big deal. I just wanted to mention it, and we're gonna move forward. Okay, so now for story, I'm not gonna talk a lot about the composition because it's very similar to TOT. You can't see the clear info for story, so you need to change things around a bit more. But if you understood what composition were very strong for you in TOT, using similar ones in story is gonna work a lot of the times. So the things I'm gonna say works for story and story hard, and I mostly want to add some specific tip that a lot of players know, but with maybe some added specificities that people don't use enough. So in story, you can disable and enable auto as you like, and you can even move around. And you can see that you can charge skills. So a lot of people already know that you can wait this way and charge all your things. And this way, when you're gonna go into battle, on the next battle, you're gonna have all your X skill charged up, and it's gonna do it instantly. And so that is interesting. But there is something even more interesting for me, and it's the fact that if you do this way, you're gonna instantly launch the X skill, but your characters are not gonna use their normal skills since they are gonna directly use their Shinsu skill. And so one thing that is even better than doing this, in my opinion, and it kind of depends on the units you're using, it's to wait only at 80 or something like this percent, and then go into auto. And this way, your character is gonna first launch normal skills, and then they're gonna use the X skill. And so this way, you're gonna optimize better using all the skills of your characters, because without this, you're gonna lose a full rotation of skills basically. And so that a bit that's something you can add on story, on R story, and even normal story. On R story, be aware of the stage limit, because you need to clear in a certain time limit. So that can be detrimental if you wait for every stage, but it can be interesting. Another thing to keep in mind in story is to manage ignition gauge, especially for R story, but it's also important on normal story. You really want to only TR on important fights, and so you can disable every TR on some very easy fights. For example, in R story, a lot of the times the first fights are not that bad, and you can enable them only for later fights, and that's gonna allow you to have more ignition, and maybe you will be able to enable more TRs this way, especially since you can wait for the X to charge up. You can have like 2 or up to 3 TRs going instantly at the beginning of the fight, and that can really carry you through story. So be really mindful about that, and that can help you a lot. Okay, so now about Ryspot. So about Ryspot, I won't be able to show you everything into details because I don't have any Ryspot available. I will be able to show you one strategy on another account, but for the first part, I won't be able to. But I have two things to really talk about. The first one is about Fate skill and mostly BAM, because using BAM can really carry you through certain Ryspot levels, especially because he got some really interesting Fate skill. So the first one to really keep in mind is the Quant Fate skill that allow him to teleport behind enemy line and to also become untargetable for the duration where he's gonna do the dash. So there is two very interesting properties on this skill. The first one is the fact that since it's gonna dash behind enemies, it's gonna split the aggro with your team, and so you will be able to survive longer using this. So that's the obvious usage. Also, one very interesting stuff is against enemies with big AoE attacks like those laser guys, because they hit all enemies. They're supposed to hit all enemies, but since BAM can get behind them, if BAM get behind them, on some occurrence, you will see that the laser guy is gonna launch the laser the other way, and so this way you can save a lot of damage on your team, and you can gain a lot of health this way. So this needs specific timings, obviously, to make it work, and it won't work every time, but it can be an interesting usage of BAM this way. The other thing is the fact that since it's becoming untargetable, it can also cancel out some skills. You have like the big robots, for example, that are gonna do a big laser, and you can actually cancel out this laser if BAM becomes untargetable at the moment where the robot is targeting him. And so it's a very specific timing, but you can really go through those levels with BAM, and it's much easier this way because you're gonna gain a ton of health avoiding 1 or 2 big lasers. So it's very, very strong. Another big thing with BAM is the other Fate skills, especially Lore 1, because Lore 1 is gonna bind the enemies, and so this is gonna prevent them from moving for some time, and that can be very strong against melee enemies. So you have some very annoying melee enemies, for example, the big worms that stuns and everything, that are very tanky. Sometimes a strategy can be to send BAM with the Quan skill and to use lore skill to buy some time to hold the big worms, for example, and to this way delay the time where the worms are gonna be on your carries and everything. And so this can be very good with especially Yuri skill as well, that can deal a ton of damage in AoE and can help you clear the first wave very easily this way. So these are the kind of strategies that you can use on Ricepot. I know that they can work on a lot of levels, especially early on, like the 200 and things like this. And they can maybe help you push levels you can't otherwise. One thing to keep in mind also is that Fate skill are available, you can manually use them. Meaning that even if you are playing in auto, if you click on or if you tap on the Fate skill, it's gonna launch without taking into account the order of the Fate skills. So this way you can manually time specific skills. And so for Quan skill, what you can do is put it last, like I did just now, and to manually use it to specifically choose the timing. So this is gonna take some time, and I know it's not for every player. Some players really don't like to do this, and I'm maybe a part of those. But I know it's a strategy that some players did, and that can be very very strong. Like on the strategy that I told you about to cancel out the robots and everything, it's gonna help you a ton to time it this way. But you can also try to understand when the enemies are doing the attacks and try to position it well, like putting it in third to maybe try to time it well and everything. That's personally what I did to try to synchronize the automatic timing with the enemy's timing. But you can also use them manually, and that can be very beneficial as well. In terms of composition for Ricepot, you can find the two types we've talked about, but I really like healing compositions for Ricepot because since you have to fight several waves and to survive some time, trying to burst during control is harder, and you need very very good control units to do that. So most of the time you're gonna use strong healing teams with good tanks and everything. And that's mostly the strategy that I suggest using for Ricepot in terms of composition. But you can also try control on some specific enemies, maybe. And if you have very good control units in combination with some supports that goes well with them, it can also work. Like Sachi can bring a lot of control by himself, and if you have things like Albeda to makes him get his skill faster, you can maybe make it works with more of control teams. But overall, I find healing compositions very good for Ricepot. Okay, so one other big Ricepot tip is gonna be a bit of a shady one, but it's very very important, and I've hoped to on an alt account to show you. So this one is using an interesting property on Ricepot, and it's the fact that Ricepot waves are using the same timing on the base wave and the boss wave. So that means that if you launch the boss at a specific timing, you can actually delay the waves this way. Because if you launch when another wave is coming, it's gonna think that the game has to wait a full wave before launching the second one, and so it's gonna allow you to have more time to fight the first wave of enemies before they send the second one. So I know explaining it this way can be a little weird for you, but but trust me, it's really really strong. And so how you want to do it is to wait that you clear a certain wave, and that when enemies just spawn, you want to launch it. So it works with the on-off button as well as on the purple one, but it's easier to do it with the on-off. So you cannot always do it because on some bosses it forces you to have the purple button and everything. So you can't always use the on-off feature. But basically what you want to do, I'm gonna show you another time because I did it one, but it's a bit specific. You want to check the wave counter there below the red bar, and it's gonna show you each time there is a wave popping in. And so you want that when a wave is gonna just spawn this way, you're gonna launch the boss. And this way you're gonna win a lot of time, and it's really game breaker for Rizepot. I know it can sound a bit like witchcraft right now, but trust me when I say that it's very, very game breaking for Rizepot, and it's very strong. Also, another important thing to keep in mind is that for ignition, you can also keep ignition gauge this way. I talked a lot about ignition in my admin video, but basically ignition gauge is an important resources when it comes to going into TR. And so this way you can also load ignition, because when you're gonna join the fight later on, if you wait a few wave, it's gonna keep building up ignition. And so what you want to do if you want to use ignition is to not launch it at the first wave, at the 0 on 9, for example, but launch it maybe on the second wave or on the third wave. And so maybe use it this way, like when the last wave comes. And this way you will have your ignition gauge full, and you will still delay the wave. So this is very important for Rizepot. Maybe if you struggle understanding, try it yourself. It's a bit of a specific timing you need to do, but the conditions are really not that hard. You need to just clear the wave and wait that another comes, and launch the boss just when the wave comes, basically. Another thing that is important is that if you just lost on the boss, you a lot of the times you're gonna need to clear one big rotation. So like this time it's 9 enemies, and to go back to 0 and wait from there, because the first wave outside the boss is a bit off timing and everything, and so it's way more random this way. But this timing thing is very important for Rizepot, and it's actually one of the big reasons that made some people retry Rizepot a lot of the times, and feel like one time they absolutely crush it without any difficulty and everything, and they don't know why. Because sometimes they unintentionally get the right timing, and it's gonna delay the wave a lot, and so it can help a ton. I really expect people that don't know about it to get unlocked a lot about with this strategy, because it really helped me a ton personally. Okay, so lastly, I'm gonna talk a bit about PvP and Ranker Wars, mostly because I don't plan on doing a specific video on this for now. Maybe I will when I have more things to say about this. But for now, just saying that it's quite similar to TOT actually, meaning that a lot of the very strong stuff in TOT is very strong in Ranker Wars a lot of the times. But you can also find a lot of the strategies that I talked about in TOT. Because in Ranker Wars, you're gonna use control a lot. You're gonna use specific units like tanks to tank AoEs, for example, and to have a front lane, to have some unit that detach from your range carries to take up the aggression and everything. And you're gonna also be also using healers, specifically because on Ranker Wars there is a new thing that makes you deal less damage at the beginning of the fight and more damage. And so that makes strategies nuking very early on less usable, and that makes strategies using healers and everything and more sustain a bit more viable. So one thing that I will add on Wonker Wars is that you can find on the wiki a lot of informations about this, because Wonker War is actually a specific note on every specific grade on every character, so you can see something like this way. And also one specific thing about Wonker Wars is that there is one type of characters that are a bit more interesting there, and that's characters that bring recovery, decreased recovery, because since healing and everything is important, characters that decrease the recovery can be really interesting in Wonker Wars. So you have specifically Daniel and Yura for now that does this, and also the first on bomb. The first on bomb is a bit specific because right now it's a bit hard to use him, because we don't have a lot of fate skills on him, and it's hard to invest resources in him and everything. But later on, he is usable in Wonker Wars, and characters like Daniel can definitely shine in Wonker Wars if you can spare the resources for him. So that's mostly the specifics about Wonker Wars, is that you will use more anti-recovery effects this way. But another specificity I will find is that I've talked about the usage of tanks to delay aggro and to take up AoE and everything, and this is very important in Wonker Wars. And this is personally why I use Jin Sung, for example, because you will see like especially dashing tanks that's gonna dash at the beginning of the fight. They're gonna dash very early, and they're gonna block a lot of the enemies on the middle of the arena, and so they're not gonna land on the carries. So that's very important. It's not very crucial in my situation, because I have so much power that I'm gonna crush enemies anyway. But I'm only showing you because it can be a very interesting strategies, and so dashing tanks are very important for this reason. And another reason that can be also to think about is that dashing tanks are gonna annoy a lot some carries, especially White. White got a reset on his skill 1 that makes him be able to use his skill 1 again if he doesn't land it on melee enemies. And so what that means is that he's gonna lose a ton of DPS if he actually lose the reset on his skill 1. Because if he doesn't reset the cooldown, it's 7 seconds where he's not spamming this, and this is why White is such an insane DPS. It's because he's able to spam this every single time. And so if you're able to reset his cooldown this way, you can win fights using this. And so using tanks or using special characters that can go into the backline for this reason can be very interesting against White. And so that's some of the specificities above Wonker Wars, is that you can understand the units against you, and you can understand their weaknesses. And so maybe you can find some units that help you fight those weaknesses. For example, if you really struggle against control, you have some units like White Heavenly Mirror Kun that even at T0 can give the action control immunity, and that can be really good. It was better before the changes with the damage and everything, because it used to be very important to have this for the first few seconds. But it can still be interesting in Wonker Wars nowadays. But that's just a heads up. But keep in mind that very strong TOT characters are a lot of the times be very strong there, and you can use similar strategies this way. Control is very, very strong because you're gonna enable your team to have some timings where you don't take any damage, and that is very good. And you can also have strategies around healing that make your team very tanky have a lot of sustain and everything that can be interesting. So that was for Rancor Wars. I know it's not very detailed, but I don't have a lot of things to say right now because the meta is shifting a lot with every release and everything, and it's a bit hard to understand every theory crafting about everything, and the game is going really fast right now. But I hope you can grasp some ideas this way. So that was it for the strategy guide. I know that it was quite a different video and maybe harder to follow and with some specific strategies and everything. I hope that you still understood the majority of it. And if you still got questions and everything, feel free to ask it in the comment and everything. If I see that some things are really I've maybe explained it bad or anything, I can redo specific videos on some subjects. But I really wanted to do these big strategies videos covering a lot of little tips to maybe help you push a few floors. And I hope you can learn things with this video. And anyway, have fun on the game and see you.